Some things are under our control, while others are not under our control. Under our control are conception, choice, desire, aversion, and in a word, everything that is our own doing. Not under our control are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, everything that is not our own doing. Furthermore, the things under our control are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded, while the things not under our control are weak, servile, subject to hindrance, and not our own. Remember, therefore, that if what is naturally slavish you think to be free, and what is not your own to be your own, you will be hampered, will grieve, will be in turmoil, and will blame both gods and men. While if you think only what is your own to be your own, and what is not your own to be as it really is not your own, then no one will ever be able to exert compulsion upon you. No one will hinder you. You will blame no one, will find fault with no one, will do absolutely nothing against your will. You will have no personal enemy, no one will harm you, for neither is there any harm that can touch you. With such high aims, therefore, remember that you must bestir yourself with no slight effort to lay hold of them, but you will have to give up some things entirely, and defer others for the time being. But if you wish for these things also, and at the same time for both office and wealth, it may be that you will not get even these latter, because you aim also at the former, and certainly you will fail to get the former, which alone bring freedom and happiness. Make it, therefore, your study at the very outset to say to every harsh external impression, "You are an external impression and not at all what you appear to be." After that, examine it and test it by these rules which you have. The first and most important of which is this: whether the impression has to do with the things which are under our control or with those which are not under our control. And if it has to do with some one of the things not under our control, have ready to hand the answer, "It is nothing to me."
Chapter 1 of the Enchiridion begins with this really famous distinction between things that are in our control or under our power, in Greek, epoumein, and things that aren't so, things that are outside of our control, that are not in our power, uk epoumein. And there's a lot of ways in which this can and has been translated. One of the most interesting ways would perhaps to be what is our business and what is none of our business, right? When we talk about people as doing things or getting involved in things that are really none of their business, that actually fits what we're talking about here. And everything in between. When we talk about control, we don't mean control in a sort of pathological sense of the person who's a control freak. We mean the things that we do control. Like I decide, whether I flip around in the book or not, right? But if I drop the book in the bathtub, I don't really control the book being ruined or not. That's up to physical processes. So you get the idea about what he's talking about there. And then when we turn to look at the things that Epictetus tells us in this list are in our control, you can see that most of them have to do with what's inside of us, or what is a matter of our personality, our consciousness. Things that are outside of our control, some of them are going to be rather counterintuitive, are external to us. So let's take a look at the things that he says are in our control. Conception, that's translation here, of hupolepsis. Hupolepsis could also be translated as assumption. It's what we're working with. It's the sort of set of ideas that we're making sense of the world with. So I have a hupolepsis that this is a book. I also have a hupolepsis that it is Stoic philosophy, because I've read it, right? Choice, horme in Greek, which can also mean impulse. For the Stoics, it means to move towards something, to choose it, right? Aporme would be to move away from it, to reject it. Orexis, which means desire. A desire in the broadest sense, or even affectivity. Aversion, eklesis, that's the opposite of desire. It's, I don't want that. So, what are things that we typically desire? So I may desire reading a book. I may also be averse to reading a book if I don't want to, if somebody's pushing me to. What I'm really averse to then is people telling me what to do, right? And so we have all of these things going on inside of ourselves. And then he says, and in a word, everything that is our own doing, everything that is, as he says, hemetra erga. Erga means, doing, deed, action. So the things that are up to us, this is not a complete list by any means, they're the things that we have some measure of choice, some measure of control. We take a role in deciding yay or nay. What about the opposite? Now this is going to be, again, from a non-Stoic point of view, rather counterintuitive. Not under our control are our body, to soma in Greek. Now you might say, well, wait a second. I decide what I'm going to do with my body. That's true. I decide whether I'm going to shower or wash it or take care of it. Epictetus would say, yep, that's perfectly correct. You do decide what you do with your body. I decide whether I go to the doctor or not, whether I do preventive medicine, sort of like preventive maintenance on a vehicle or a tool or something like that, right? And Epictetus would say, you're completely correct. But you can still get hit by the bus, and you can still die of cancer. And you can still have all sorts of things happen to your body that you really do not have control over. You have some measure of control over your body, but you don't call all the shots the way that you can with things having to do with your consciousness. Now, you might also say, well, wait a second, what about people who have a chemical imbalance? Well, if you think that that's coming from the body, you don't control your body in that case, right? And that could affect your mind as well. What else? Our property. So, this book, again, if I drop this into the bathtub and all the pages get screwed up, I don't control that. I can't snap my fingers and say, pages, fix yourself, or something like that. People can come along and steal our property. Our property is very vulnerable. What else? Reputation. That's a very important one. We tend to think that we do control our reputation. Doxai in Greek, the opinion that other people have about us. Office, or power, or position, we often say. Archai in Greek, right? Which means things like holding public office. But if we think about our own world today, do you get promoted to manager or not? That's not completely up to you. I mean, you can definitely make sure that you won't get promoted to manager by acting like a screw-up, but even if you do everything the way that you're supposed to, maybe there's no job. Great example of this is in contemporary academia. Lot more applicants than there are positions available, unless you want to do adjunct work, and you don't control that. That's not up to you. If it was, it wouldn't be like that. So he says, in a word, everything that is not our own doing. What does that mean? If it's not our own doing, if it's not our own erga in Greek, that means it's up to somebody or something else to call the shots, to make the decisions about it, to determine it. So if it's the weather, well, it's these vast, complex systems that we don't actually not only have much control over, but we actually don't understand all that well. We can't predict way ahead of time the way that we might like to. But if it's about whether or not you get the promotion, it's about all these other factors, or whether you get a good performance review, or whether somebody gives me a thumbs up or thumbs down in this video. Not in my control. So he goes on and he draws a very important conclusion from this. He says, furthermore, the things under our control have certain characteristics. They are by nature, by the way that they're constituted, by reality, we might say. Sometimes it's useful to substitute the way that we talk about it, reality, for nature when we're reading Stoic texts. By nature, these things are free, unhindered, and unimpeded. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, if we think about, for example, our assumptions or our choices or our desires and our aversions, again, it often feels like these are just imposed upon us, but Epictetus says, no, we have some measure of control. We have some measure of choice when it comes to these. If I decide that I am no longer going to choose to smoke, or that every night I am going to drink a cup of tea, or a glass of tea in this case, that is up to me. The only thing that can prevent me from doing that, other than things keeping me from getting tea, is myself. What about the other things? He says, things not under our control are, and here he's got an interesting set of qualifiers, are weak, servile, subject to hindrance, and not our own. Even if we do enjoy them, even if we think we do have some measure of say-so in them, it's not to a great degree. So think about your body again, for instance. You can work out all you want and then suddenly die of a heart attack. That happens to quite a few people. You can decide, I'm going to lose weight and go on this great diet and I'm going to feel so great. And then it turns out that the food that you're eating, you develop an allergy to. All these things are possibilities because it's not really under your control. So he draws another conclusion that's really at the heart of Stoic philosophy here. Remember, therefore, that if what is naturally slavish, what is naturally determined by another, where there's somebody else saying, you do it this way, you think to be free, and what is not your own to be your own, you will be hampered. Things are going to get in your way. You will grieve. You will be in turmoil, and you will blame both gods and human beings. So if we get this distinction wrong, if we follow what, say, society or culture or advertising in our own time, advertising creates for us all sorts of mistaken conceptions about what's good and bad, what we really do have control over. For instance, if you think that by going and buying some product, you're actually going to assure for yourself success in the workplace, or a suitable mate, or friends around you, or a great time watching the Super Bowl, or anything like that, you're really setting yourself up for some major disappointment, for some turmoil, like he said. And we have a choice about whether we do that or not. We aren't simply robots dictated by our programming. We are able to some degree, go in and reconfigure our programming. But we have to understand how the human being is set up. We have to engage in what he's doing here, which is what we call philosophical anthropology, or the study of human nature. So, he goes on and he says, if you think only what is your own to be your own, and what is not your own to be, as it really is, not your own, then things are going to be different. Then no one will ever be able to exert compulsion on you. If you stick to what you actually do have control over, and you don't worry about the things that you don't have control over, other people won't be able to push you around in any meaningful way. As Epictetus says in another place in the Discourses, well, you can take my body and do what you're going to do with it. I can't really prevent you from doing that, but that's my body. That's not me. When it comes to me, you can't make me decide that what's wrong is right and what's right is wrong, or what's true is false and what's false is true. The only way you can make me do that is if I myself collaborate in the process. So if we follow this distinction, nobody's going to be able to compel us. He goes on, And he says, no one will hinder you. Nobody's going to get in your way. Think about how many times we find ourselves feeling frustrated because we want things to go a certain way and somebody keeps that from happening. Those of you who drive, think about what the act of driving from place to place is like. Not only do you have the other drivers on the road and the road conditions, sometimes the road doesn't even go where you want it to go. There's cones set up. Oh, you can't go that way. The bridge is out. Well, if you decide that you were only planning on going if it was going to be possible for you, rather than I have to get there, you're not going to be hindered. It's not you that's being hindered. It could be your car. He goes on as well. He says, you'll blame no one. You're not going to get upset with other people, right? You're not going to criticize. You're not going to get angry and shout. All of that is condensed into what he's calling blaming. He says you will find fault with no one. You will do absolutely nothing against your will. That's an interesting one, and that's worth dwelling on and thinking about for a while. How is it that you're not going to be pushed or pulled or prodded into doing anything against your own will when you live in a world of things that are constantly impinging on you? Well, if you stick to what you actually do have control over, you have control over that. If you choose to desire the wrong thing, that's your choice. You're not being compelled against your will or cajoled or seduced, because the only reason anybody can seduce you or compel you is because you give in. That's what Epictetus is saying here. But you give in because you mistake what is under your control for what is not under your control. And you place the good in things that are not under your control. He says you'll have no personal enemy. No one will harm you, for neither is there any harm that can touch you. That's also worth thinking about. How is it that in a world in which we're so vulnerable in so many different ways, nobody can harm you? Well, the question there is, what is the you? What is being harmed? If you think that you are your body, well, of course you can be harmed. I can poke you in the eye, or stab you through the heart, or crush your toes, or do all sorts of other things, and you can do them to me too. Of course, you can't through the camera, but imagine you hit a button that let you do that sort of thing, right? If it's your property, wow, you're totally vulnerable. Not only can somebody come along and steal it, or weather screw it up, the state can come in and take your property as well. There's all sorts of vulnerabilities. Reputation, online presence. If Epictetus were around today, he would say, your social media profile is not up to you. That is something that really is outside of your control. So he says, with such high aims, therefore, remember that you must bestir yourself with no slight effort to lay hold of them, to keep these things in mind. But you will have to give up some things entirely. If you want to stick to these principles and you want to follow this through in a practical way, you can't just do whatever you want. You will also have to defer, to put off others for the time being. Now notice what else he says. You have to make a kind of choice. If you wish for these things also, what's good, what's fundamentally good, what will make us free, what is within our control. But, as he says, at the same time you also wish for wealth, for property, prosperity, and office, to hold power, to be in charge. It may be that you will not even get these things. Those are often up to other people, right? Those aren't up to us entirely. We can sort of prime the pump, but we can't necessarily get those things just by making a decision for them. Whatever people may tell us out there about, oh, you just have to want it hard enough or work hard enough, you can work as hard as you want in some cases and still die a pauper. You can work as hard as you want and make friends with everybody and nobody gives you a position. And if you're going to pursue those things, like he says, you're not going to get the other things that you do recognize to be good, like peace of mind, like tranquility, like a moral faculty, what you really are, in accordance with nature. And he says, you will aim also at the former, and certainly you'll fail to get the former, which alone bring freedom and happiness. You're not going to get it. You have to make a decision. Are you going to pursue the things of the external world? Are you going to use those as your criterion? Is that going to establish your set of priorities? Or are you going to focus on the things that really are within your power and do the best that you can with them? You can't do both, Epictetus is saying. So he goes on, and now he tells us about something a little bit different. He's changing the topic slightly in this passage. He says, make it therefore your study at the very outset to say to every harsh external appearance. The Greek for that is phantasia. And when we're translating it as external appearance, we mean something that's impinging on us from the outside. But because it's phantasia, you could just as well say that what we're talking about is our imagination, because that's also what phantasia means. Things that impinge upon us, things that seem a certain way to us, that we imagine to be that way. We could have whole trains of imaginations together, right? Oh my gosh, the world is falling in because this is terrible, and this is terrible, and this is terrible. That's a whole chain of phantasiae, or impressions together. And he says, whenever something like that confronts us, this is what we ought to do. We tell it. We talk to it. We say, you are an external impression and not at all what you appear to be. You don't know. Maybe it could be what it appears to be, but not necessarily so. So, the cup of tea could have gone cold. It's not. It's actually warm. If it goes cold and I say, oh my goodness, oh this is so terrible. Who wants to drink cold tea? I mean, people do drink iced tea in other circumstances, but when we want hot tea, we really want hot tea and not cold tea, right? Oh, the whole thing is ruined. The meal is ruined. The whole evening is ruined. Epictetus would say, okay, when things like that are pushing themselves on you, when you're getting these imaginations, you can say to them, wait a second. Now, maybe you're right, but maybe you're not right. Maybe you're just an impression, and you're not what you pretend to be. I'll actually check it out and see whether that's the case. So he says, after you examine it and test it by these rules that you have, by these criteria. The Greek is actually kanon, which means something like a measuring stick, right? When we talk about the canons of a discipline, what are the canons? They are the things in the Enchiridion, the Stoic philosophy. When you use Stoic philosophy to tell whether or not your external impressions are veridical or whether they're full of you-know-what, or maybe somewhere in between, then you can actually get to the bottom of things. And then you can have the better response. So he says, after you examine it and test it, the first and most important of these rules is this. Does this impression have to do with the things which are under our control or those which are not under our control? And if it is something that's not under our control, we should have ready at hand the answer. And when he talks about having ready at hand, this means we should have in our mental toolbox, as we say. We should be equipped with being able to trot out for ourselves what the Stoics called a dogma. We get the word dogmatic from that. People think it's bad to be dogmatic. What it really means for ancient Greek philosophy to be dogmatic is to have ready at hand, a whole supply of things that you can use to make sense of the world and to get yourself out of trouble. So what is the thing that we want to have at hand? It is nothing to me. So again, if we want to use the example, the tea. Oh, I'm so glad I've got some hot tea. It's going to be so wonderful. The tea is cold. The night is ruined. I can't possibly stand this. As the kids say, I can't even, right? What we can do, and what Epictetus is saying to us is, hey, slow it down. You don't have to follow along that line of reasoning. Let's take a look at what's going on here, and let's apply this principle. Was that something in my control, or was that something out of my control? Whether or not the tea gets warm, or stays warm, or gets cold, pretty much up to physical phenomena. It's not subject to my will. I certainly can desire that it remain hot, but that desire by itself does nothing to heat the tea or to conserve its heat or anything like that. And if I think it does, I'm nuts, right? And many of us are nuts in this way a lot of the time. And part of what the whole task of Stoicism is, hey, let's be less nuts. One way we can do that is we say, was that something under my control? No? Fine. Then it doesn't matter. It's nothing to me. It doesn't matter one way. It doesn't matter another way. Notice what he's not doing here. He's not saying, it's all garbage. It's nothing in the sense like, you are dead to me, or anything like that. That's still reactive. This is dissociative in a certain sense. I'm just not going to be entangled, at least in the sense of how I feel and how I think, and whether I have calm within myself or whether I allow myself to be upset. I'm not going to allow myself to be entangled with whether tea is hot or cold. I've got bigger fish to fry, like my own psyche and the fact that it steers me into thinking that tea actually matters. So that provides you with, I think, a useful example. And you can come up with lots of other examples to make sense out of this passage on your own. But notice that what he's been talking about here and playing off of is this fundamental distinction. What is in our power or under our control, what is not in our power. Two different opposites. An important distinction that we have to get right or we're going to be steered astray.